other countries, including my own.
All right, thank you. You're watching On the Spot, viewers, a very special edition on the IPU conference. And with me is the Secretary General of the IPU, Anders Johnson, and our Speaker of Parliament, Rebecca Kadaga Litwala. All right, Honourable Speaker, you chair a parliament that, of course, is largely filled with members of the NRM party, the ruling party. And it is said that most of the parliaments actually around the world have a majority normally that is from the ruling government or the party in power. And that resolutions sometimes made here may not really have an impact on those governments, because largely enough, if it's taken back to their parliaments, a decision will be made that benefits the government in power. Is that true?
No, I think if you've been watching the Uganda parliament, there are times I'm not sure which is the government side and which is the opposition side. If it's a matter that's...
But that's the 9th parliament. When we talk about the 8th parliament,
I want to account for the 9th parliament.
Yes, okay.
So if it's a matter of public concern, you find that everybody is speaking the same language. So I have no doubt that members will continue to work together to ensure that we do the right thing for the country, irrespective of our parties. And in the organization for the IPU, I have as many opposition members as I have NRM members in the organization of the IPU. My head of media is from the DP. My head of protocol is from the FDC party. My head of accommodation is from the FDC. My former head of entertainment before she went to the streets is FDC. Head of budget, transport, etc. Those are NRM members. So I think I practice multi-party democracy in reality in this country. The arena is parliament, and I think I'm doing that as expected.
And just to retract to that question, and most governments or most parliaments, like I was just saying, have members of parliament, of course, who are leaning or have allegiance to the ruling party or are members of the ruling party. And there is this debate that, of course, most parliaments normally do take the decisions or are, in most circumstances, do have decisions made that really are government decisions, that obviously are pro-government proposals or decisions. And so as an organization, as an IPU, isn't that one of the key challenges that you have, that as you discuss these issues, you still have parliaments that seem to be divided or have, in terms of here as IPU will speak as one voice, but when they go back, they'll probably want to speak along the lines of the government.
Well, first of all, when the IPU speaks, it doesn't speak with one voice. The IPU is a multitude of voices.
You have resolutions there.
And the resolutions
yes.
tries to distill where the consensus lies. And that is what we bring back to our parliaments. And of course, there will be parliaments where the majority will disagree with some of those recommendations. And the sense of the recommendations is not to provide a straitjacket or pretend even that we could, but it is to indicate where we think, the majority of the politicians think, that the solutions lie, and we encourage others to work on them. Some will do it, and some will because they have a different political philosophy or orientation or wish. And I think it is less to do with the majority or the opposition. It's mainly about where the politics in that country lies and what the majority wants. And that is less to do with whether or not there is a large majority in the parliament, or the IPU does not represent necessarily the opposition views in parliaments around the world. It represents the global political opinion represented in parliaments. So it's not per se something that worries us. Having said that, we have had many discussions, and I think it is an ongoing discussion in our organization, where we plead for ensuring that countries should do their best to ensure that parliaments actually represents the full diversity of society. And there it is true that many parliaments, and that's not unique to developing countries, not at all, many countries around the world face this problem of how to make sure that in fact that is the case, that we do have all sectors of society. Many parliaments around the world do not reflect, for example, minority views, do not have diversity represented in society. And that, I think, is a major challenge. But it's a challenge that that parliaments, if you will, share with the political parties.
All right. I'm sure we will come to a position also on the minority views. I would love to hear from you. And I also want us to discuss the theme, but let's first talk about one of the other key issues to be discussed this time. And I'll bring up the Arab uprising. You have one of the key themes for or agendas in this meeting, human rights, which obviously will be handled by another standing committee. I'm told, is it true, first of all, that the committee will be open at some point to views from the public and closed still to the media and obviously the eye of the media?
No.
I think I
Yes.
think on that,
Yeah.
what you refer to is we do have a committee
Yes.
that has as a mandate to defend the human rights of members of parliament.
Yes.
It is a committee that is made up of a select group of elected members of parliament, and they examine complaints of violations. 99% of those complaints concerns members of opposition in parliament, maybe for natural reasons. The kind of complaints typically involve, for example, that their parliamentary rights have been abused, that their parliamentary immunities have not been respected, that they have maybe been detained without cause, maybe they're subject to political persecution. There's a whole variety, or even security threats, disappearances, outright killings. These are the cases that the committee discusses. When it works, it meets in camera. Because it is based on a dialogue between the committee and the authorities of the country concerned. And very, very often that committee, through that work, through that dialogue, is actually able to solve cases and get individuals out of jail, for example, and back into parliament and their rights restored. But some of the cases are not easy to solve, and then the committee renders them public. So there will be both a presentation to the media towards the end of this assembly of those cases, and there will also be a public reporting to all the parliaments at the last sitting of our council, where the committee will present all of these cases and ask for each parliament, in solidarity with their colleagues who are in trouble, to intervene and to call to their colleagues in that country to try to solve them.
All right. Let's quickly then move then to the uprising, because it's related to human rights. I can see you were in Egypt in February. Actually, I think the 21st of February, you were in Egypt, and you would be the right person to ask this. Of course, we saw violations, human rights violations, through the Arab uprising, and that's why we actually had probably the Arab uprising. Any lessons learned? And as the IPU, do you have something you're going to present to this assembly and positions to learn from for probably other countries like Uganda?
I think that each one of these countries, and Egypt is one of them, but you have Tunisia, you have Yemen, you have Libya, you have many others, and potentially many more others elsewhere too. But in each one of these countries, what you find, there is people say no to the status quo. People are reclaiming respect for their rights. People want to have a real say in how their governments are run. They want to have better protection, and they are not willing to accept the status quo. And what this means is that there has to be, we come back to the issue of having a say in how the country is run. Every one of these situations that we are talking about, there is a consensus that the way to deal with this is by having a parliament with the requisite powers to hold government to account, to be able to legislate, and in that to be representative of all the society. Some of these countries have done this better than others. If we take the issue of women's participation, the elections, and based on the electoral law that was adopted in Tunisia, and where the IPU was assisting in designing that electoral law, or providing advice to the government, to the transitional authorities, led to a parliament that has close to a third of its members are women. The elections in Egypt, they do not have more than a couple of % who are women. That should be a cause of concern to the Egyptians themselves, and so I think that is one of the lessons that we go back to the beginning of this discussion. If you really want to achieve development in your country, it is, I think, undisputed today that you need to have the whole society engaged. It must mean also the women in that society, and that must mean also having them part of the political structures and or the political decision making. It must mean that they should be part of the parliament. But that's one example. But there are many others.
And I don't know whether you could not tell them about the progress made in Myanmar over time. I think
I can say that also in the case of Myanmar,
Yes.
there has been, as you know, a parliament that was elected in 2010, a parliament that did not necessarily represent the full diversity in Myanmar, since a large part of the political opposition was excluded from the initial elections. But since then, they have that parliament, imperfect though it may have been, is a parliament that is really, in the 11 months it's been there, exerting its power, and it's really starting to hold government to account, and it is modifying the laws to allow for greater political freedom. It has amended the electoral law to ensure that parliaments in the political opposition can now participate in the forthcoming by-elections on the 1st of April. So it is possible and it's essential to help these parliaments to provide that political space whereby the full citizenry can participate in the political decision-making process.
Yes, I see that you'd actually report to the 126th IPU Assembly on, of course, the findings in Myanmar and your last visit to Myanmar, I think, which was in March, as early as the 12th of March. We're taking a very short break, but when we come back, we'll of course discuss the uprising in Syria and the IPU's discussion, or whether they will discuss Syria in that emergency session. Don't go away, you're watching On the Spot.